I am standing in my childhood bedroom, hands trembling, as I hold an old family photo. The echo of my mother's words still rings in my ears like a broken record. Rick does not feel comfortable with you here anymore, Diana. Maybe it is time you found your own place. 28 years of memories are being packed into cardboard boxes, but as I prepare to leave this house, I am not walking away empty-handed. I have been preparing for this moment longer than anyone realizes. Before I tell you how my own mother chose her new husband over her flesh and blood daughter, let me know where you are watching from. Do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe because you will not believe the twist Rick never saw coming. Trust me, this story has an ending that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about family loyalty. Growing up without a father was never easy, but my mother Linda and I had built something beautiful together over the years. After Dad passed away from cancer 5 years ago, leaving us with a modest life insurance policy and our family home, Mom and I became each other's rock. At 52, Linda was still vibrant and deserved happiness, which is why I felt genuinely excited when she started dating Rick Brennan 2 years later. Rick appeared to be everything we could have hoped for in those early days. At 45, he owned a successful auto repair business with 3 locations across town. His smile was warm and inviting, and he treated my mother like absolute royalty. More importantly, he seemed to genuinely care about my future. When I was struggling with college tuition payments, Rick stepped in without hesitation, covering my final semester expenses. He remembered my birthday with thoughtful gifts and always asked about my studies with what felt like sincere interest. The transformation in my mother during their courtship was remarkable to witness. Linda glowed with happiness in ways I had not seen since before Dad's illness took its toll on our family. She would spend hours getting ready for their dates, humming old love songs, while applying makeup with the excitement of a teenager. Rick brought flowers every Friday, took her dancing on weekends, and made her laugh until tears streamed down her cheeks. When they announced their engagement after 18 months of dating, I was genuinely thrilled for them both. Their wedding was a small but elegant affair, held in our backyard, with Rick's brother Tom as best man and me as maid of honor. Rick's vows spoke of protecting and cherishing Linda for the rest of their lives, promising to honor the family she had built and the daughter she had raised. As I watched them exchange rings, I felt hopeful about our future as a blended family. After graduating with my bachelor's degree in marketing just 2 months later, Rick even congratulated me with a generous gift card, telling me to take my time finding the right career opportunity. But the honeymoon phase ended more abruptly than I could have anticipated, and the changes began manifesting in subtle ways that made me question my own perception of reality. About 6 months after their wedding, I started noticing shifts in Rick's behavior that felt like tiny cracks forming in what I had believed was a solid foundation. The warm smiles became less frequent, replaced by neutral expressions that made me feel invisible in my own home. Comments that had once been supportive transformed into something else entirely. When I mentioned struggling to find entry-level positions in marketing, Rick's response was no longer encouraging advice, but pointed questions about my timeline for independence. "At your age, shouldn't you be building your own life somewhere?" he would ask with what seemed like genuine confusion, as if my presence at 28 was somehow inappropriate. The way he phrased these observations made me doubt whether I was being overly sensitive or if something had genuinely shifted in our household dynamics. When friends visited, Rick would make comments about how nice it must be to have so much free time, despite knowing I was actively job hunting and contributing to household chores. The rules started appearing gradually presented as reasonable requests that became increasingly restrictive over time. Rick suggested that having friends over during his work week was disruptive to his rest schedule. Weekend gatherings needed advance approval because he and Mom might have plans. My occasional late nights out became subjects of household discussions where Rick expressed concerns about security and the impression our neighbors might form about our family values. Linda began supporting these new guidelines with explanations that made me question my own judgment about their reasonableness. Rick works extremely hard managing 3 businesses, Diana. He deserves to feel peaceful in his own home. Her tone carried a defensive edge I had never heard before, especially when discussing anything related to Rick's comfort or preferences. The mother who had once celebrated my independence now seemed to view my presence as a potential source of conflict with her new husband. Our evening conversations, once filled with discussions about everything from current events to family memories, gradually became shorter and more superficial. Linda would glance toward Rick when he entered the room during our talks as if seeking permission to continue or gauging his mood about our interaction. The spontaneous moments of connection we had shared for decades felt increasingly forced and scheduled around Rick's availability and approval. Meanwhile, Rick began inserting himself into conversations about my future with suggestions that felt less like helpful guidance and more like strategic planning for my departure. He mentioned job opportunities in Denver and Phoenix with unusual frequency, always emphasizing how much better the markets were for young professionals in those cities. When I expressed interest in local positions, Rick would find reasons why those particular companies or industries might not offer long-term stability. The family dynamic that had once felt natural and supportive now carried an undercurrent of tension that made every interaction feel calculated and temporary. Everything changed completely on a Tuesday evening in March when I accidentally overheard a phone conversation that shattered every assumption I had made about Rick's intentions for our family. I had returned home early from a job interview and decided to grab a snack from the kitchen before heading to my room. Rick was in his home office with the door slightly ajar, speaking in hushed tones that immediately caught my attention because of their secretive nature. "I need her gone, Tom. Linda's got a nice insurance payout from her first husband, and I cannot access it fully with the daughter around questioning everything." The words hit me like a physical blow, causing me to freeze completely as the reality of what I was hearing began to sink in. Rick continued speaking to his brother with a casualness that made my blood run cold. "She's smart, and she asks too many questions about finances. I need complete control over Linda's decisions, and that will not happen while Diana is living here playing protective daughter." My hands were shaking as I quietly pulled out my phone and started recording, knowing that this conversation contained information that could protect my mother from a devastating betrayal. Rick's voice became clearer as he apparently moved closer to the door, discussing timeline strategies and methods for encouraging my departure without raising Linda's suspicions about his true motivations. "The insurance money from Diana's father was just the beginning," Tom explained Rick. "Linda inherited her parents' estate last year, too. We are talking about substantial assets that could solve all my problems, but I need her isolated from outside influences who might make her think twice about financial decisions. The garage business is drowning in debt from my gambling issues, and this marriage was supposed to be my solution." Armed with this devastating recording, I knew I had to approach my mother immediately, despite my certainty that the conversation would be the most difficult of our lives. Linda was in the living room reading when I sat down beside her with my phone in hand, my heart pounding, as I prepared to potentially destroy her happiness while trying to save her future. "Mom, I need you to listen to something very important." I began, my voice steadier than I had expected given the circumstances. "Rick is not who you think he is, and I have proof of what he really wants from this marriage." Linda's face immediately shifted to an expression of irritation mixed with disappointment, as if I was about to present another complaint about household rules or personal conflicts with her husband. "Diana, I am tired of these constant issues between you and Rick," she said before I could play the recording. "He has been nothing but generous and patient with you, and I will not tolerate you trying to sabotage my happiness because you cannot accept that I have found love again." Her defensive tone made it clear that this conversation was going to be even more challenging than I had anticipated. When I finally played the recording, watching Linda's face transform from annoyance to shock to complete disbelief, I realized that presenting evidence would not necessarily result in immediate acceptance of the truth. "You recorded a private conversation," she asked incredulously, focusing on my methods rather than Rick's betrayal. "This could be taken completely out of context, Diana. Rick might have been joking with his brother or discussing some hypothetical scenario." The next hour was filled with the most painful argument of our lives, with Linda defending Rick's character, while I presented additional evidence I had been quietly gathering over recent weeks. I showed her documents proving Rick's gambling debts, copies of legal papers indicating his previous marriages had ended under suspicious financial circumstances, and bank statements revealing his attempts to gain access to her accounts. "You have never liked Rick because he is not your father," Linda shouted during the height of our confrontation, her words cutting deeper than any criticism I had ever received. "You are jealous that I found someone who makes me happy, and you cannot stand that your place as the most important person in my life has changed. Nothing I say will convince you to give him a fair chance because you want to keep me to yourself." The accusation felt like a betrayal that went beyond anything Rick could have orchestrated because it came from the person whose opinion mattered most in my world. In that moment, I realized that my mother had become so emotionally dependent on Rick that she was willing to sacrifice our relationship to maintain her illusion of marital happiness. "If you cannot accept Rick as part of this family, then maybe you need to find somewhere else to live," Linda said finally, her voice breaking with emotion, but her resolve clearly firm. "I will not choose between you and my husband Diana, but I will not allow you to destroy my marriage with these paranoid accusations and invasion of privacy." The ultimatum hung in the air between us like an unbridgeable chasm, and I knew that my mother had made her choice even before I responded. Looking into her eyes, I saw a woman so afraid of being alone again that she was willing to ignore every warning sign about the man she had married. "If you want me gone, Mom, I will leave," I said quietly, my heart breaking as I spoke the words. "But I will not abandon you completely, even if you cannot see the danger you are in right now." That night, after Linda had gone to bed, and Rick was presumably celebrating what he thought was his victory, I began implementing a plan that would ensure my departure served a greater purpose than simply removing an obstacle from his path. If Rick wanted me gone, I would leave, but I would take with me enough evidence to protect my mother and expose his true nature when the time was right for her to see the truth. Over the next 3 days, I systematically documented everything I could access about Rick's background financial situation and ongoing deception of my mother. Using my marketing research skills, I discovered that Rick's previous 2 marriages had both ended in divorce proceedings, where wealthy women had accused him of financial manipulation and emotional abuse. Both ex-wives had ultimately settled out of court after Rick threatened lengthy legal battles that would have cost more than their marriages were worth. I contacted a private investigator named Marcus Wright, whom I found through an online directory of licensed professionals, and provided him with what I had gathered so far. Marcus agreed to conduct a more thorough background check and financial investigation in exchange for a reasonable fee that I paid using money from my small savings account. Within 48 hours, Marcus had uncovered Rick's substantial gambling debts, with several casinos totaling over $200,000, and evidence of recent contact with loan sharks who were becoming increasingly impatient about repayment. The most damning discovery came when Marcus found documentation proving that Rick had already attempted to modify Linda's will and life insurance beneficiaries using forged signatures and claiming spousal rights that did not actually exist under state law. These documents had been rejected by the insurance companies, but Rick had been working with a questionable lawyer to find alternative approaches to accessing Linda's assets without her knowledge or consent. Armed with this comprehensive evidence, I scheduled a consultation with Jennifer Patterson, the family lawyer who had helped us with legal matters following Dad's death. Jennifer reviewed everything I had gathered and immediately recognized the serious nature of the situation, confirming that Rick's actions constituted multiple forms of fraud and that Linda was in genuine danger of financial ruin if his schemes succeeded. Jennifer advised me to create an irrefutable record of Rick's intentions by arranging a situation where he would incriminate himself in front of witnesses, preferably including his brother Tom, who seemed to be his primary confidant and accomplice. She suggested that a carefully planned family gathering might provide the perfect opportunity to expose Rick's true character while ensuring that Linda could not dismiss the evidence as misunderstandings or fabrications. I decided to organize what I would present as my farewell dinner, inviting Rick, Linda, and Tom to join me for a home-cooked meal that would serve as my way of making peace before moving out of the family home. Rick was enthusiastic about the idea, probably viewing it as confirmation of his success in driving me away, while Linda seemed relieved that I was apparently accepting the situation gracefully. The evening I had planned would give Rick enough rope to hang himself with, but I needed to be extremely careful about my approach to ensure that the truth emerged naturally rather than appearing forced or orchestrated. I spent hours researching conversation techniques that would encourage Rick and Tom to reveal information without realizing they were being manipulated into confessions that would destroy Rick's carefully constructed facade. On the night of the dinner, I prepared Rick's favorite meal of grilled steaks with loaded baked potatoes, setting the table with our best china and creating an atmosphere of celebration rather than confrontation. I had hidden recording devices throughout the dining room and living room, ensuring that any conversation would be captured clearly enough to serve as legal evidence if necessary. Tom arrived already having consumed several beers, which I hoped would lower his inhibitions and make him more likely to speak freely about his brother's plans. Rick was in an exceptionally good mood, probably anticipating that this dinner represented the final step in removing me from his path to controlling Linda's finances. Linda seemed nervous but hopeful, clearly wanting the evening to heal whatever rift she perceived between her husband and daughter. As we ate, I guided the conversation toward topics about marriage, financial planning, and family dynamics, carefully probing for information while appearing to seek advice about my own future relationships. Tom, emboldened by wine and Rick's obvious comfort with the situation, began sharing stories about Rick's previous marriages that revealed far more than either brother realized. Rick's first wife was so naive about money, Tom laughed, completely oblivious to the implications of his words. Rick had her convinced that transferring everything to joint accounts was romantic. When she finally figured out what was happening, it was too late to recover most of her inheritance from her grandparents. The conversation continued along these lines for over an hour, with Tom providing details about Rick's gambling problems, his techniques for manipulating vulnerable women, and his specific plans for accessing Linda's assets once I was no longer present to interfere. Rick occasionally tried to change the subject, but Tom was too intoxicated to recognize the warning signs and continued revealing incriminating information. When Tom mentioned Rick's current debt situation and the pressure he was facing from creditors, Rick finally became angry enough to abandon his careful facade. "That is enough, Tom," he snapped, his voice carrying a threatening edge that Linda had never heard before. "Diana does not need to know about our private family business." But it was too late for damage control because I had already obtained everything I needed to protect my mother and expose Rick's criminal intentions. The moment had arrived to turn the tables completely, and I felt a surge of confidence that surprised me with its intensity as I prepared to reveal the truth that would shatter Rick's carefully constructed deception. Standing up from the dinner table with my phone in hand, I looked directly at Rick and spoke with a clarity that left no room for misinterpretation about what was about to happen. "Rick, I know exactly what you are trying to do to my mother, and I have documented evidence of every illegal action you have taken since marrying her," I announced, watching his face transform from confusion to panic as he realized his plans were completely exposed. I have recordings of your phone conversations, financial documents proving your gambling debts, evidence of your attempts to forge changes to Mom's will, and testimony from your previous wives about your pattern of financial abuse. Linda gasped and stared at me with wide eyes, then turned to Rick for an explanation that would make sense of the accusations I was presenting. The silence stretched for several seconds before Rick attempted to regain control of the situation through a combination of denial and attack on my credibility. "This is ridiculous," Diana Rick said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow and desperate even to his own ears. "You have been looking for reasons to cause problems between your mother and me since our wedding day. These so-called documents are probably fabricated, and your recordings were made without consent, which means they would never hold up in any legal proceedings." I continued speaking without allowing his interruptions to derail my presentation of the facts that would protect my mother from further manipulation. "I have already consulted with our family lawyer, Jennifer Patterson, who confirmed that your actions constitute multiple felonies, including fraud, forgery, and attempted theft. The private investigator I hired found documentation of your $200,000 gambling debt and your contact with loan sharks, who are threatening violence if you do not repay them immediately." Tom, who had sobered up considerably during this exchange, began backing away from the table as he realized his own involvement in Rick's schemes had been exposed and recorded. "Rick, man, you told me this was just about getting some space in the marriage." Tom stammered, his face pale, as he understood the legal implications of what he had helped facilitate. "You never said anything about stealing Linda's money or committing fraud." The room erupted into chaos as Linda demanded explanations from Rick, while I continued presenting evidence that made denial impossible. Rick's desperation became increasingly obvious as he alternated between threats, attempts at justification, and pleas for understanding that fell on deaf ears now that his true nature had been revealed completely. "You have no idea what you have done," Diana Rick snarled, abandoning all pretense of the caring stepfather role he had maintained for over 2 years. "I could have given your mother a comfortable life, but you have ruined everything, with your paranoid suspicions and inability to mind your own business. This family was better off without your constant interference and judgment." Linda's horrified expression as she listened to Rick's angry outburst revealed her dawning understanding that every warning I had given her about his character had been accurate. The man she had married and defended against my concerns was showing his true personality for the first time, and the contrast with the loving husband she thought she knew was impossible to ignore. "Mom, I am calling the police right now unless Rick agrees to leave this house immediately and never contact you again," I said firmly, holding my phone ready to dial while maintaining eye contact with Rick. "He can take his personal belongings and go, but any attempt to access your accounts, change your legal documents, or threaten either of us will result in criminal charges and a restraining order." Rick realized that his position had become completely untenable, and that continuing to fight would only make his legal situation worse. After several minutes of heated argument, he agreed to pack his essential items and leave, though he made it clear that he considered this a temporary setback rather than a permanent defeat. Linda spent the remainder of the evening apologizing tearfully for not believing me and thanking me repeatedly for saving her from a devastating betrayal that could have destroyed her financially and emotionally. The relief on her face as Rick gathered his belongings and left our home was evidence that some part of her had always suspected something was wrong, but had been too afraid of being alone to acknowledge her doubts. As we watched Rick's car disappear down our street, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction knowing that my decision to fight back rather than simply accept exile had protected the person I loved most in the world. The battle was over, but the process of rebuilding our relationship and healing from this betrayal was just beginning. Linda's first call the next morning was to Jennifer Patterson, requesting immediate assistance with securing her accounts, revoking Rick's access to any financial information, and restoring her original will to its previous state. The second call was to Marcus Wright, asking him to continue monitoring Rick's activities to ensure he did not attempt to retaliate or find other ways to access her assets. Within a week, we learned that Rick had fled the state, presumably to escape his gambling debts and avoid the criminal investigation that Jennifer had initiated based on the evidence I had gathered. His auto repair business was seized by creditors, and his brother Tom was cooperating with authorities to avoid charges related to his own involvement in the scheme. The immediate crisis was over, but the emotional work of rebuilding trust and processing the betrayal would require time, patience, and commitment from both Linda and me as we moved forward with a deeper understanding of how precious and fragile family bonds could be when threatened by outside manipulation. The experience had taught me that sometimes protecting the people you love requires making difficult choices and standing up to opposition from the very people you are trying to help, but the courage to do what is right ultimately leads to stronger relationships and personal growth that makes future challenges easier to handle. The weeks following Rick's departure brought a mixture of relief and reflection as Linda and I worked through the complex emotions surrounding his betrayal and our own relationship dynamics that had allowed the situation to develop as far as it did. My mother's healing process involved acknowledging how her fear of loneliness had made her vulnerable to manipulation, while my own growth came from learning to trust my instincts and take decisive action even when doing so felt overwhelming. Linda joined a support group for women who had experienced financial abuse, finding comfort in connecting with others who understood the shame and confusion that comes with realizing someone you trusted had been systematically deceiving you. Through these group sessions, she learned that Rick's behavior followed a predictable pattern that skilled manipulators use to isolate their victims from support systems and gain control over their resources. The process of rebuilding our mother-daughter relationship required honest conversations about how we had both contributed to the communication breakdown that had made Rick's manipulation possible. Linda acknowledged that her defensive reactions to my concerns had prevented her from objectively evaluating the warning signs I had recognized, while I accepted that my approach could have been more diplomatic and less confrontational in ways that might have helped her hear my message sooner. Despite my original plan to move out and establish independence, Linda asked me to stay in our family home while I launched my marketing career, not out of financial necessity, but because we had both realized how much we valued our close relationship and wanted to maintain the connection we had rebuilt through this crisis. Living together as adults with clearly defined boundaries and mutual respect felt different from the dependent dynamic we had shared immediately after my college graduation. My job search took on new energy and focus as I channeled the investigative skills and confidence I had developed during the Rick situation into presenting myself as a strong candidate for positions that required analytical thinking and problem-solving abilities. The successful resolution of such a complex family crisis had given me evidence of my own capabilities that translated into more effective interviews and better professional opportunities. Within 3 months, I had accepted a position with a startup marketing company that specialized in helping small businesses develop comprehensive digital strategies. The role offered creative challenges, opportunities for advancement, and colleagues who appreciated my attention to detail and ability to uncover information that others might overlook. My experience with Rick had taught me to recognize patterns and inconsistencies that made me particularly effective at market research and competitive analysis. Linda's confidence grew as she took control of her financial situation with help from Jennifer Patterson and a certified financial planner who specialized in protecting assets for single women. She learned to ask questions about any financial advice she received and developed systems for making important decisions only after careful consideration and consultation with trusted professionals who had no personal interest in her choices. The support group experience inspired Linda to volunteer with a local organization that provided resources and advocacy for women escaping abusive relationships, allowing her to transform her painful experience into a source of strength and guidance for others facing similar challenges. Her natural empathy and hard-earned wisdom about manipulation tactics made her an effective counselor and advocate. 6 months after Rick's departure, we received notification through Jennifer Patterson that he had been arrested in Nevada for running a similar scheme against an elderly widow using the same techniques of charm isolation and financial manipulation that he had attempted with Linda. The charges included elder abuse fraud and theft, carrying potential prison sentences that would prevent him from victimizing other women for years to come. The news brought a sense of justice and closure that allowed both Linda and me to fully move forward without worrying about Rick's potential return or retaliation. Knowing that our actions had not only protected our family, but also contributed to stopping a repeat offender gave deeper meaning to the difficult choices we had made during those challenging months. As I reflect on this experience now, I am grateful for the lessons it taught me about the importance of trusting your instincts when something feels wrong, even when the people you love are not ready to acknowledge the danger they face. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to let someone you care about destroy themselves, even when they initially resist your efforts to help them see the truth. The courage to gather evidence, confront uncomfortable realities, and take action despite opposition served me well in both personal and professional situations that followed. Learning to set boundaries, advocate for what is right, and persist in protecting important relationships has become a foundation for how I approach challenges and make decisions throughout my life. When I left that house on the night of our confrontation dinner, I did not just take evidence with me. I took back my power to protect what truly mattered and discovered strengths I did not know I possessed until circumstances demanded that I use them to save my family from devastation that could have destroyed us both. The experience taught me that family loyalty sometimes requires making choices that feel like betrayal in the moment, but ultimately demonstrate the deepest form of love and commitment possible. Standing up for truth and justice, even when doing so is difficult and scary, creates stronger relationships and personal integrity that make future challenges easier to navigate with confidence and wisdom. Have you ever had to protect someone you love from their own poor judgment? What would you do if you discovered that a family member was being manipulated by someone they trusted? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges and finding strength in difficult situations. Share this video with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of trusting your instincts and standing up for what is right even when doing so requires courage you are not sure you possess. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's self-destructive choices even when they cannot see the danger for themselves.